the radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday morning. Ooh, a little weird. Weird for me anyway to be doing a show in the morning. I'm not a morning person, so this is a little different. But scheduling and everything, it just turned out to be the only time today that I could do the show. We'll probably do the same thing on Monday. So given the Monday is Labor Day, yes, I'm in California time, which is completely messing me up. I've been here 3 weeks and I'm still messed up over the change in it just shows you what not traveling for 5 months does to the ability to cope with time zones. but yes, it's way too early for doing shows like this. Monday we'll do the same thing because stuff going on Labor Day. So we'll do Monday at 10 o'clock. But tomorrow we'll do 1 o'clock. That's Pacific time, 10 o'clock Pacific time, 10 a.m. Pacific time. And tomorrow we'll do 1 o'clock Pacific time as well. So that is the program for the weekend. Then we'll do a show on Wednesday. And then I'm off. I'm off for 5 days. I'm going to take a road trip up to Northern California, visit some friends. All right, let's see. Before I get to kind of the topics that advertise the diversity industrial complex, and then I want to talk about an interview that Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, gave to NPR. A couple of things just that are in the news that I quickly touch on. One is this story, crazy story in the Atlantic about by Jeffrey Goldberg about Trump's disdain for the military and disrespect for vets and disrespect for fallen soldiers. I'm not surprised by it, but on the other hand, no sources. This is a big story. The media overall is taking it as if it's gospel. It's just shows the times that we're in, that it's completely 100% all kind of tribal and partisan. I don't think Jeffrey Goldberg would have published this in a different era without being able to cite sources. The fact that the sources are not coming forward suggests they're either, if it's true, that they're either afraid for some bizarre reason, but they could be because kind of the politics and because of the world in which we live. They're afraid of Trump, or that they're not telling the truth and they don't want to be discovered as liars. So either way, the story is it's not good news for what it means for politics in America. It's just a sad reflection of the state of the world. It's also sad that I think so many people are not surprised that this might be true, right? Derek, stop rubbing in the pathetic win of Toronto 2 days ago against Boston. It was just pathetic. It was just ridiculous. Anyway, Derek's enjoying rubbing that in. But don't worry. Celtics are going to win today, and they're going to win the series, I think, in 5 or 6 games. So that was, I just want to, comment on that as a reflection of the state in which we're in. Trump has shown his disdain for kind of military issues in the way he treated McCain, who I'm not a fan of, never was a fan of, didn't even vote for him. But to treat him as if it was a disgrace that he got captured is a little weird. But that is Trump. The other issue I just wanted to mention are the polls. It does look like the race is tightening. It does look like, particularly in places like Florida, there was a poll yesterday actually showing Trump ahead, which was the first time and completely took everybody by shock. I think Trump has a really, really good chance of winning. I think that the more, as I said over and over again, the more riots there are, the more violence there is, the more anarchy there is, and the weaker Biden appears, particularly in the face of these riots and in his unwillingness to really strongly, forcefully condemn them. the more likely it is that Trump wins. So I think this is it's going to be an interesting, really interesting election, and everything's on the table, and everything is possible. So did video just freeze for you guys? Let me know if video froze. On the other hand, we've still got 3 months, and who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what happens with COVID? Who knows what happens with riots? Who knows what happens in the debates? So much could happen in the next 3 months that trying to assume we know what's going to happen in this with this presidential election at this point is, I think, is ridiculous. Are you guys? Is the video fine? Video is good. Okay, it's unfrozen on my end, which is fine. And as long as it's a little choppy, but it's not the slow computer. It is. It's a lack of RAM, I think. It's a lack of RAM. And unfortunately, the RAM is soldered on these MacBook Pros, so you can't upgrade it. So 16 megabytes of RAM is not enough to do the show. I have now learned the hard way. You need 32 at a minimum. 64 is ideal. In Puerto Rico, I have 64, and everything's smooth and no problems at all. So while I'm in California, we're just going to have to live with these RAM issues as long as I'm trying to stream it on all the different platforms that I'm streaming. We will see. Okay, just a quick reminder, don't forget to like the show before you leave, even if you stay for just a few minutes. If you like what you hear, if you find it entertaining, if you like the show generally, if you want to see the show be more prominent on YouTube, if you'd like us to see us rising in the algorithms or being more up there on the algorithm thing, the algorithm promote us, then please like the show. It really helps with the algorithms. Of course, the best way, the most effective way to get the show more visible, more seen, is, and therefore more subscribed to, is if you share. If you share to your audiences through social media, that is the beginning. Of course, YouTube also monitors how many times the share button is clicked. And the more shares they are, the more prominent on the algorithms the show is. It's just the way it works. The more YouTube thinks that you guys like the show, the more YouTube thinks that you guys are willing to share the show, the more YouTube, the algorithms, the god of the algorithms, are willing to promote the show and willing to rise it up on the recommended list. So the way you can help the show really grow is by sharing and liking. And then finally, if you'd like to support the show and help us keep doing these shows and doing more shows and increasing the quality of the video, you'll notice that the short videos now have a lot more animation. They're a lot more creative. There's often Christian puts some Ayn Rand in the back, so you get Ayn Rand in her own words, and we're gonna continue to play around with that and continue to try to make those short videos more interesting, more lively, and more likely to go viral. So Christian is working hard on that. Indeed, the video that went viral over the last few weeks is the one with Jerry Seinfeld. That definitely went viral, and that's just, you need to use big names in the title. So I'm going to start thinking about how to do that more commentary videos. I've known that for a long time. So I will think about what commentary video I can do this weekend. Of course, you can help there. If you have seen a short video that you think would be good fodder for me to comment on, please just send it to me at yaron@yaronbrookshow.com, yaron@yaronbrookshow.com. I prefer it via email because otherwise I don't remember where you send it. Like, I get LinkedIn messages, I get Twitter messages, Facebook messages, then I get Patreon messages, and then, of course, I get just normal messages, and then I get email, and then there's WhatsApp, and it's no end, the means of communication. It's just ridiculous how many different means, and I never remember where I got what message. I remember somebody emailed me X, but I can't remember where it is. And I still haven't figured out how to catalog across all those different platforms. As long as I don't do clickbait. Of course I'm going to do clickbait. What are you talking about, Chris? Of course we're going to do clickbait. That's why Jerry Seinfeld's in the title. Although I did talk about Jerry Seinfeld, so it wasn't pure clickbait. But yes, absolutely we're trying to do clickbait. Why not? All right. Capitalist Nick. That's the topic we're going to be talking about in the next few minutes. And Michael, that is a good question. We will definitely get to that. Anything else I need to update you on? Anything else going on? Right now, if you shared this on Twitter, shared this in other places, we'd get more live views. So, be active while you're participating. Try to promote. People have done this. Take some quotes, juicy quotes that I do during the show, post them on Twitter with a link to the show. Try to get more people to come here, to come over here to watch. Right? There's actually a feed of this actually on Twitter Live going on Periscope, which usually feeds into Twitter. I'm not sure why it's not feeding right now. Okay. Let's see. Ooh, tons of Super Chat questions coming in. We will get to those at the appropriate time. Let's see. Quickly, let's do these. Hi, Yaron. Thanks for getting me hooked on The Bureau deep in season 1. Can you comment on Moltro as a tragic hero? He lives a life of lies, but he values his work. It seems futile. Is he destined to hurt all around him? How do I answer that without giving away the story? But yeah, I mean, he's destined to hurt himself primarily. And part of what the series shows is that a life of lies inevitably puts you in situations that are lose-lose. And inevitably puts you in a situation where there are no winners, that everybody is a loser, or that the bad guys ultimately are winners. And as you go deeper into the show, and Moltro suffers more and more, in every season because of decisions he made really in season 1. The whole thing untangles, but he really is a hero who's in a position where he has to struggle between his professional values and his personal values. And the show is very much driven by values, and that's why I like it so much. It's very intelligent. It's very focused on the different values different people have and the way they get reflected. All the characters are interesting. It's very character-driven. And by season 5, you will see the extent to which, at the end of season 5, the damage of what happened in season 1 has played out. And how many people suffer. And some of them are good guys, some of them are bad guys, but the good guys definitely don't get off scot-free, and that's reality. In reality, compromises and look, intelligence, which is by definition, in a sense, lying for a living, being a spy, there are costs to pay. There are massive costs to pay. If you watch The Spy, it's another great show on Netflix, I think, The Spy, about the Israeli spy in Syria by the name of Eli Cohen. It's a fabulous. It's got Sacha Baron Cohen doing a real acting job. I mean, and he's really good. But The Spy on Netflix, highly recommended. You see again the cost spies pay. There's no way around it. Now you might say it's worth it. Because they're fighting for a higher value, for freedom, for their own integrity, for their own values, their abstract values. But you cannot say there's no price to pay, and other people often pay that price. It's not just you. The people close to you, the people you love, often pay the price for what you're doing. So I highly recommend The Spy. I highly recommend The Bureau, but just I warn you that The Bureau is not a feel-good spy thriller where the everybody all the bad guys lose and all the good guys live happily ever after, get the girl and live well. It's more naturalistic than that. So it's not quite as romantic as maybe I would like it to be. It's more naturalistic but it's very powerful, very well made, and very, very interesting. It's interesting. So I encourage you to watch Bureau, which is on Prime, and The Spy, which is on Netflix, and both are excellent espionage stories. And The Spy is a true story. The Spy is based on a true story, and what happens there really did happen, which makes it just will blow your mind that was possible, that somebody did that, the kind of the courage And he's smart. He's super smart, and you'll see that in The Spy. Somebody says, seems like something Trump would say for shock value, not because he really meant it. It's a problem that we have a shock jock for president. I don't think it's shock value if he said the stuff about the soldiers. I think he really believes it. Remember, he got out of Vietnam. Not I blame him for that. I mean, anybody should have gotten out of Vietnam, but I think he's a caricature of an egoist in a sense that he's about himself in a narcissistic way, and he doesn't understand why people would go and fight and risk their lives and get injured and even lose their lives for the sake of a value like the country. I've never thought Trump was a patriot. I don't think he understands what that means or would fight for his country in any meaningful way. So, all right, let's jump in to this diversity industrial complex. There's a new one. Diversity, we've heard about the defense industrial, the military industrial complex, but now we have a diversity industrial complex. I guess this term was coined by actually a guy I don't like, but he's written about this topic, so he's the guy I'm citing, Chris Rufo, because he works for a despicable organization called the Discovery Institute that does work to disprove the theory of evolution. There's no more work for you. Let's prove that God created human beings and that there's no evolution. I mean, even the religious Jews know that that's BS, and at least they have to integrate the theory of evolution into their view of God rather than these Christian nuts who think that they can prove intelligent design, and it's just bizarre. Anyway, Chris Rufo works for the Discovery Institute. I'll just note that. He is the guy that I guess broke the story about the diversity industrial diversity industrial complex, which is a massive exaggeration, but a great slogan. But an interesting story and a really scary story, if to the extent that it is true, and I have no doubt that it is. It just makes complete sense to me that this is absolutely true. So you can find a story about this. I mean, it's probably all over the place, but the story I refer to is in the City Journal, city/journal.org. It's a story by Christopher F. Rufo. It's called Profiteering Race Theorists Expand Their Footprint in the Federal Government. And it turns out, shockingly, that this critical race theory, this white fragility, this BS that I've talked about for a long time now, about the racism of the left, the idea that race is important, that race matters, that race is extraordinarily important, and then indeed, by the very definition of the fact that you're white, you're guilty of racism, you're guilty of kind of implicit racism, and that if you don't devote your life to what is called anti-racist, which is not just being against racism as we understand it, that is treating people based on race rather than based on their character, that is not what the racists talk about. It's not treating blacks as blacks. That is considered racist now. So they've got racism upside down. Indeed, for them, the racism is racism involves not being a racist, and not being a racist involves being a racist. It's bizarre, right? If you treat people as members of a race, you're not a racist according to them. If you don't treat people based on their race, if you just treat them as individuals, then you're a racist. So it's got the whole thing upside down. It truly is, bizarre and evil, because it's destroying the concept of race, it's destroying the concept of racism, not the concept of race. Race should be destroyed. It's destroying the concept of racism in the name of collectivism, in the name of racism. And as you know, Ayn Rand considered racism the lowest form of collectivism. I consider racism to be one of the most despicable sets of ideas possible. And these people of the left are racists. So they've taken this critical race theory, they've taken this racist ideology, white fragility, the idea that all whites are guilty, the idea that whites have to actively work to deal with this, and that the only really way to deal with it is to work to dismantle what's called systemic racism. And the only way to work to dismantle systemic racism is to really work to dismantle the American system of government, to work to dismantle the American Constitution, to work to dismantle capitalism, property rights, rule of law. That is the only way to get rid of capitalism, to get rid of racism, according to critical race theory, is to get rid of capitalism. It's to get rid of individual rights. It's to get rid of property rights. I mean, I can't think of a more kind of disgusting theory. Frank says Hegelianism run amok. Absolutely, this is kind of a Hegelian, filled with contradictions, but that's what Hegel relished. Nonsensical gibberish, but at the core, anti-individual. And what really is driving this is hatred of the individual, hatred of individual rights, hatred of individual success, hatred of individual property, hatred of anything individual. You are a member of the collective, and what they want is collectives to be treated equally. And in order to get to the point where collectives are treated equally, one has to elevate one collective more than the other for now, because all these years the one collective has been diminished more than the others. So whites have had what they call the privileged position, and therefore in order to fix this, we have to devalue whites and we have to elevate minorities in order to achieve a new balance. But it's all about elevating and raising and reducing the group. And the thing that they hate the most, the thing that offends them the most, the thing that they fight against the most is the individual, is what makes this country and has always made this country unique. That is the concept of an individual coded into the law, coded into a system of government that protects the individual as the smallest minority, that protects the individual because the individual has rights and only individuals has rights. Here they want to completely obliterate the concept of the individual. Therefore, there is no such thing, for example, as individual racism. It's all about you as a member of a group. It's all about them as members of a group. It's all about the membership of the group. It has nothing to do with you as an individual. So they've been teaching this theory now for a couple of decades at least on American universities, and we're seeing the consequence of that. I think in the riots, in BLM, in what has been happening on campuses over the last decade or so. This is being taught at corporations. I talked about that corporations are bringing in the author of White Fragility to teach this stuff, and she's making a fortune teaching seminars on how whites should feel guilty and how they should destroy capitalism and how they should diminish themselves and how diminish their group. Remember, it's all about the group, not them as individuals. No, Michael, I haven't gotten to Powell. Powell will come after this topic. And now it turns out that over the last, almost decade, they have been teaching this at the federal government, and they've been teaching this to the federal government and very likely in the military. And they brought these crazy nutty is too nice, evil ideas into the federal government, where they're teaching basically the dismantling of the American system and the dismantling of capitalism, dismantling the American system of government to the people responsible for the American system of government, to the people managing, if you will, the bureaucracy that is our government. And they've been doing this. They've been doing this through seminars for profit, and that's why it's called. That's why Chris Rufo has coined this term, the diversity industrial complex. And it turns out that these seminars are being given in the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is just recently the National Federal Union. So it's all the finance, all the real the ones responsible for regulating capital markets, regulating the most essential feature of capitalism. It's the distribution of capital. And they've been having these seminars about white fragility, whiteness, about white privilege, about this despicable theory and how all of these people should apologize, basically, and feel guilty for being white. The idea here is virtually all white people contribute to racism by the very fact that they're white, not by any individual action, because individual action doesn't matter. All that matters is that you belong to, right? Why is it called industrial? Again, it's a term he coined. It's called industrial because the guy makes a lot of money at it. So he names the guy, it's somewhere in this art, Ross, somebody Ross, who's billed the government over $5 million. $3 million for consulting services in 2011 alone. So this has been going on actually for 15 years. This has been going on since 2006. Has billed the federal government more than $5 million for diversity training, seminars, and materials. The biggest year was 2011. This is being done in NASA, where he billed them $500,000 for power and privilege sexual orientation workshops. So remember that, I don't know when this started, but years and years ago, decades ago, the whole idea of sexual harassment, racial harassment in the workplace started, and all corporations started bringing in sexual harassment, workplace harassment, racial sensitivity training. All these trainings started coming in, and they were required. So we at the Heinemann Institute had to, by law in California, do one of these harassment seminars. And I remember we hired some lawyers that did a kind of a half-assed job at it. I mean, some of it is legit and some of it's complete BS. And so they did the legal aspects of it, which was useful for our staff to know because nobody wants to get into trouble with this. But you had to do it. You had to literally sign off that you had done it. Otherwise, the state would come after you. So it's not surprising that these seminars were brought into the government. And initially, I'm sure they were the same kind of thing, mainly focusing on the legal issues around sexual harassment, workplace harassment, discrimination, things like that. But these consultants are cutting edge. They probably stayed up with the latest academic literature about these issues, the latest thinking in academia, and slowly these things evolved to the most radical, nutty, crazy, bizarre stuff that is today, this whole white fragility stuff that is going on. And indeed, according to this article, and I'm quoting, and again, this is written by Chris Rufo at the City Journal, who is what do you call it? Evolution denying conservative. He writes, so this is not some leftist writing this. This is on the right. He says, incredibly, Ross, this is a guy who runs these seminars, and his like-minded colleagues, and there are many of them, this is the industrial complex, have expanded their footprint under the conservative Trump administration. I don't know the Trump administration is conservative, but anyway, people in the Trump administration certainly are conservative. Based on a review of federal contract data, since Trump's inauguration, Ross has conducted at least 17 trainings for federal agencies, including the Department of Justice, the National Institute of Health, the Office of the Attorney General. He says, so this has been going on throughout the Trump administration, has been accelerating. And the idea is to convert everyone in the federal government to the work of anti-racism. And we know that anti-racism is not only an anti-concept, it is an evil anti-concept. It's focusing, again, not to create colorblindness, but rather to dismantle the American system of government, to dismantle capitalism, whatever remnants still exist of capitalism in America. Of course, it goes beyond this because Ross, at the end of all of his training, and I'm sure all the trainers do this, they encourage the employees to take their training home, to discuss this stuff with their children. So he says that racism takes shape in our brains around 3 years old. So you want to get them when they're young to make sure that your kids don't become racist. It truly is unbelievable. So anyway, this, it turns out, has all been happening under Trump's administration's nose for the last 4 years. So today, Trump announced, I guess today, that he is banning these seminars, that he is stopping them from being held, that he's withholding funding. It's hard to tell with these executive orders whether they're applicable, whether they can actually be imposed, whether they actually work. I don't know. But Trump has basically stopped this today from happening. You almost think that this story broke to give Trump another campaign election talking point, because this is the kind of stuff that really riles his voters up and really gets people excited and might get people on the fence to go on Trump rather than the other side. And it gives him a great opportunity to show that he is fighting for the good cause. And anyway, so today he withdrew funding. But this is not surprising to me. I mean, some people are shocked that this is happening in our government. I mean, it's not surprising at all. It completely makes sense to me. It's you cannot escape the consequences of the latest trends in academia. You cannot escape what is being taught at our universities. You cannot escape what the activists are doing. You cannot escape the weakness of the American political system, left and right, to stand up to these crazy ideas. You cannot escape the fact that the American government, Congress, both under Republicans and Democrats, have passed all kinds of so-called anti-discrimination laws that have required all this kind of training at the federal government and have given these wackos a foot in the door. And I'm sure that these people, like this Ross, who's billed the government millions of dollars, is probably not initially one of the wackos. He probably just came in to do regular kind of training and then has become more radicalized because it's cooler, it's hipper, it's more within his field, it's the cutting edge, and he does it. And it makes him money because the federal government has an infinite amount of money to spend, so that it is incredibly profitable for these people to continue doing this and to continue to promoting this garbage within the federal government. So it doesn't shock me at all that it just shows the impact of anything that's happening at the universities. It shows the importance of our intellectuals. It shows the importance of combating intellectuals. It shows that even if you have a president who objects to these ideas, it doesn't matter because the bureaucracy does it anyway. So even though you had Trump in the White House, these ideas all over the federal government because somebody puts them in there, and he doesn't care, partially he's not watching over all the bureaucrats, and his people are not watching over all the bureaucrats. Although you'd think that the heads of the different agencies, like Mnuchin, would know what's happening in the Treasury Department. You'd think that the different heads of the regulatory agencies would know what's happening in their little thing. But maybe they just don't want to rock the boat, and maybe the fact is that they're required to have some diversity training and they're required to have some anti-racist training, and what do they know about what's appropriate and what's inappropriate? They don't think about it. This is the importance. This is the importance of the intellectuals. This is the importance of having the intellectual high ground. This is the importance of why what really matters is not what happens in the White House. What really matters is not what happens in Congress or in the bureaucratic agencies. What really matters is what happens at the universities. And what really where the battle really lies is the intellectual battle. The battle really lies is reading books like White Fragility and shredding it on a bigger and bigger and bigger stage, and ultimately getting intellectuals who disagree with White Fragility to speak up, to write books against it, to write articles against it, to appear on television against it, to give voice to all the poor souls who have to sit through these seminars who are thinking, no, this can't be right, this is complete garbage. But hey, this is what these PhDs think, and nobody's speaking up against it. And that's how it becomes this part of the culture. It's our job as intellectuals to speak up against it. This is what we must do. This is what we must constantly do all the time. And this is why I do what I do. This is why I encourage other intellectuals to do what they do. And this is why I think it's so important for the Iron Man Institute to be talking about these issues in the intellectual landscape, both the corruption of reason, rationality, capitalism, egoism on the left and on the right. It's important for us to present an alternative, a rational alternative, to bring reason to the conversation. And that's how we'll get the better people on our side. All right. Before we jump into talking about Powell, the Fed, the economy, and you can tweet out now that I'm about to talk about Powell and the Fed. That should bring a bunch of people onto the show, because there's a lot of people out there, like the Peter Schiff listeners and so on, who like kind of discussions of the Federal Reserve. And I am not going to be kind to Jerome Powell. I'm not going to be kind to this idiot. I'm going to be pretty brutal. So go out there and tweet that Yaron is within 5 minutes, 10 minutes max, is going to talk about Jerome Powell, the Fed, and the state of the economy. But let us start by taking a few Super Chat questions that are $20 and more. that I rank the Super Chat questions based on how much money you put in. And of course, I want to thank you all for supporting me. And those of you who can support me, I really appreciate it. Those who support me at even at $2, thank you. So I appreciate all the Super Chat questions. I do give priority to the higher valued ones just because more money, more attention. That's the way. Super Chat is a big source of revenue for me. So those of you who can, or what we call whales, those of you who can contribute more on the Super Chat, more meaning $100 or more. I really appreciate it when you do that. It helps a lot, and it helps revenue from the show continue to accelerate. Last month was a month that is going to be hard to beat in terms of the amount of money we raised on the Super Chat. I think it was somewhere around $8,000 in 1 month on the Super Chat. So I don't know how we beat that, but I'm sure we could. But it's up to you. You guys can help me beat that in the month of September. So I encourage you to use the Super Chat to support the show. All right. Somebody asked, what is the psychological motivation for nihilism, particularly organized intellectual nihilism? It must be deeper than mere envy. It's not, in a sense, right? So at the core of nihilism is hatred. Hatred of, and in that sense, it's deeper than envy, right? Because what drives envy at its core, and what's deeper than envy, is a hatred of life, a hatred of self, a hatred of being alive, of life itself. It's what motivated Ellsworth Toohey in The Fountainhead. If you've read The Fountainhead, if you haven't, you really, really should. It's despising life, despising your life, and therefore despising all life. And from there, it's a short step to go to wanting to see, because you're suffering, because you're hating, because you're miserable, because you're depressed, angry, frustrated, horrified, wanting the rest of the world to feel the same, wanting to bring that same hatred to everybody else. And so nihilism psychologically comes from that sense of worthlessness, that you're worthless, lack of self-esteem. It comes from a hatred of self, and it is driven by, and therefore, the wanting and wishing that same destruction on everybody else around you. And that is its intellectual, its psychological source. Now, intellectually, there are lots of people who create, because nobody wants to identify themselves as a nihilist. Very few people do. They don't want to identify themselves. They don't want to admit to themselves that they hate life and they hate themselves. They don't want to admit themselves that they want to destroy people around them and that they're envious and they just want misery for other people. So they build philosophical systems to justify it. And much of postmodernism is motivated by nihilism, right? Much of modern philosophy is motivated to create a justification for nihilism. And you think about much of modern philosophy where secular modern philosophy that basically says, there's no point in being alive, there's no point in living, there's no God, there's no meaning, there's no purpose, there's nothing. There is this void. And all you are lonely and miserable, and that's the best you can hope for. I mean, modern philosophy basically reflects that psychological state that many nihilists have. Not all modern philosophy, some modern philosophy. And it provides the intellectual justification for the nihilist. Well, if everything is really philosophically this miserable, if everything is inherently pathetic and bad and horrible and despicable, and there's no out and there's no heaven and there's nothing good that can come of anything, then why not have fun knocking down the towers? Why not have fun? And they view it as fun. Burning stuff down, shooting people, destroying. So the intellectual stuff is just a structure to create rationalization for the hatred and for the misery that they actually feel. Right. By the way, if you're on Facebook and you're asking questions, I can't keep track of that chat. If you want to ask a question and actually get it answered, then you have to go to YouTube and you have to use the super chat feature. I just can't keep track of all the questions being asked. So unless you put a dollar amount to it, I'm just not going to be able to answer it. So move over to YouTube. The chat there is more active anyway. A little nuts sometimes, although today seems relatively reasonable. All right. This one is another super chat. Hi, Team YB. Please be sure to contact Eric Weinstein to request to invite you on the portal podcast. Dr. Weinstein can be reached via Twitter, Facebook, and his website. Yeah, please do that. I think it'd be great if I got onto Eric Weinstein. I've actually sent a message to Eric Weinstein asking him to have me on his podcast, but he did not respond. He knows me. We did an event together with Dave Rubin a few years ago. I think he, my guess is they don't want to be associated with objectives for whatever reason. Okay, two super chat questions, and then we'll go to Powell and the Fed. Thank you, Dr. Brook, for recommending Mr. Sunshine. I watched it through the summer and got me even more dedicated to objectivism and my personal values. Thank you. P.S. My stock portfolio is coming. Not sure what that means. Is it coming to me? I assume not. I don't know what. Anyway, cool. I'm so glad you enjoyed Mr. Sunshine. Those of you who have not watched it or could not get through the first episode, please try to watch through the first episode. It is, in my view, one of the most aesthetically rewarding experiences you can have with a modern show or something made in the 21st century. And I've watched it now twice, and my wife and I have decided we're going to watch it every year. It is such a wonderful, wonderful show. At some point I can do another show about it and explain why I love it so much. But I think some of you are tired of me talking about Mr. Sunshine. So, but please watch it. It's on Netflix. It's a Korean show. It's just you have to get through the first. You have to get through the first episode. First episode is not easy to understand what's going on. Once you get over that, I think you'll do fine. Completely unrelated, way out of left field, but do you like superheroes are actually heroic? Do you think superheroes are actually heroic? What would make a superhero character heroic in the sense of crime fighting and the likes? I mean, I've talked about superheroes in the past. I'm not a big fan of superheroes. I'm not a big fan of the way they're often depicted. Mostly they're depicted as because they have superpowers, they have a duty to sacrifice. They have a duty not to have a personal life. They have a duty not to pursue their own personal values. They have a duty to serve others, and that's what they do. And then they're not respected by the people who they help, but they have to do it anyway. And they can never get the girl, and they can never be happy. So it presents heroism versus happiness. It presents a conflict. I also don't like the fact that many superheroes cannot kill their enemies. I think that's ridiculous and pathetic. Of course, you should kill the bad guys. So it's got this false sense of, pacifism or anti-violence. But I think the worst thing about them is, culturally, that you have to be super in order to be heroic. And B, that you have to have superpowers in order to be heroic. And B, that, we've got a listener from Angola. Wow, I think that's a first. At least the first that I know of, right? Angola. Wow, that's so cool. That you have to have superpowers in order to be heroic, but also the fact that they contrast this, which a lot of movies do, between happiness and heroism. You can't have both. I think the Batman trilogy, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, really depicts that well. And what I liked about the trilogy, even though I'm not sure it's completely believable, is that the end. And I'm giving away, there's a spoiler alert here. In the end, Batman retires. He gives up. He says, I'm not willing to be an altruist, in a sense. I'm not willing to sacrifice. I'm not willing to do all this work and not be appreciated, and nobody care, and not be valued. I am going to go and pursue my own happiness, my own life. And the final shot is him in Paris at a cafe with a woman he loves, if I remember right. So that I liked, but it took a long time for him to come to that conclusion. Eric asked, do you celebrate September 2nd anyway? What do you think of having an Atlas Shrugged Day? I mean, I like the idea of having an Atlas Shrugged Day. I don't celebrate it. I just haven't gotten into that mode. But I like the idea of having an Atlas Shrugged Day. I like the idea of having holidays. And and days in which you remember important things and days in which you celebrate important things. I'd love to see that somehow institutionalized. Maybe I can help do that starting next year. Maybe we can have an Atlas Shrugged Day every September 2nd. It hasn't gotten into my... Anyway. Well, all right. Let's see. So let's talk about Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve. So Powell did an interview. So as you know, Powell is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. He was appointed by Trump. He is not an economist by training. He is, I'm not sure what he is by training, kind of a business guy by training, a finance guy maybe, but not an economist by training. He just did an important speech at Jackson Hole. Now, they didn't do it literally at Jackson Hole because they couldn't be there, but once a year there is a conference at Jackson Hole that the Fed holds, and the Federal Reserve chairman always gives an important speech about monetary policy and about the Fed policy at this event. And this year, Jerome Powell basically gave the speech saying that they're changing the way they look at the inflation. This is price inflation, so mostly I'm going to use inflation as price inflation. When I'm not, I will differentiate. I will tell you that I'm speaking about monetary inflation, which is the proper use of inflation. But since everybody, including the Fed, talks about inflation as price inflation, it's just easier to use their terminology for now. So he basically announced that instead of targeting 2% inflation, which is what they've been doing unsuccessfully, by the way, because according to their measures, we have now reached 2% inflation for, really since the financial crisis. And even before that, inflation wasn't at 2%. And I think the last time inflation was at 3% was, I don't know, in the 1980s or something. It's been a long, long time since we've had price inflation, at least in the way that the Fed measures it. They have now shifted the way they're measuring inflation to, well, not the way they measure inflation, but the way they're targeting inflation to some kind of average inflation. So that indeed what he's saying is that we're actually shooting for more than 2% inflation. And as long as over time the average is 2%, that's fine. And if we overshoot 2%, it's no big deal. We just want inflation. Please, please give us some price inflation. That's what we want. Which is interesting because often with these kind of topics, when you want something, you actually get it. Psychology does play a difference. And if people are convinced that the Fed really wants inflation, they'll start pricing that in, and that could have pretty interesting consequences in the economy. Anyway, a few days ago, Jerome Powell gave an interview to NPR, which Daniel Weishaupt, thank you, Daniel, sent me and asked for me to comment on. And it is actually really interesting interview because it shows the thinking kind of in a little bit. I found the speech that he gave at Jackson Hole just gibberish and difficult to follow and stuff. Here I think he's clear about what he means. It's still gibberish in a sense, but at least it's clearer in terms of what his intentions are, how he thinks about the economy. And I think that's really, really interesting. This is the most important, at least politically, the most important economic voice in the country. More important, I think, than Trump, more important, I think, than Mnuchin in terms of setting the economic policy of the United States. I think that what the Fed does can tank the economy faster or can elevate the economy faster, or cause damage in a variety of different ways and in more interesting ways than even the federal government can. And it's usually hidden. That is, the damage they do is usually hidden from most people. Whereas if taxes go up, you feel it. If regulations go up or down, you feel it. If taxes go down, you feel it. When the Fed does stuff, you don't know that what you're feeling is caused by what the Fed has done. So it is a stealth operator that has a profound impact on the economy. Probably bigger than anything a president does or the Treasury does. Now, maybe not bigger than what a president could do because you could really deregulate on scale or change the tax codes dramatically on scale. in a way that would have a profound impact on the economy. But most presidents, what they do is at the margins. What Trump has done, but even for the bad, what Bush and what Obama did was all at the margin, all negative at the margin. But and nobody's done anything positive, big, maybe ever, right? Ever. Closest we came was Jimmy Carter and Reagan, who did a lot of interesting stuff on regulation, and then Reagan did some stuff on taxes that was beneficial. And cutting taxes is not necessarily it, right? Cutting taxes is not necessarily beneficial. Spending is what matters. But anyway, I don't want to go there. I want to go to Jerome Powell. So I thought I'd go over this interview. Unfortunately, I didn't find it like on video, because then we would have done a commentary section. So I'll just have to read what Jerome Powell actually says and then comment on it that way. So I know it's a little less entertaining and less efficient, but we'll do that. Okay. So, let me give you a little bit of background. There is in the history of economics a famous curve called the Phillips curve. And the Phillips curve basically suggests a relationship between unemployment and inflation. And the idea is that when unemployment is low, inflation is high. And when unemployment is high, inflation is low. And if you want to reduce unemployment, you need to increase inflation. That is, it assumes not just a empirical relationship, but also a causal relationship. That's called the Phillips curve, right? It's a relationship between unemployment and inflation. And for many, many, many years, it was considered like the gospel. And it was always criticized by people like Milton Friedman, by the Austrian School of Economics. Everybody said, no, this is wrong. The Phillips curve is not true. Here's the economic theory to show it, and it doesn't work. There is no trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Those are not two things that you trade off. There's no economic world in which that really happens. That's the causal mechanism. You're misunderstanding unemployment, and you're misunderstanding inflation. Anyway, the Keynesians, the traditional economists, didn't pay attention, and they followed the Phillips curve. Now, in the late 1970s, we had what seemed like a empirical refutation of the Phillips curve. Because in the late 1970s, we had both inflation, high inflation, over 10%, and high unemployment, over 10%. That's not supposed to happen. If you have high inflation, unemployment should be low. And if you have high unemployment, inflation should be low. That's what I said, right? If you have high inflation, unemployment should be low. The other way around. So we had stagnation, low economic growth, high unemployment, and high inflation. By the way, the causal mechanism supposedly is this. If the economy does well, when the economy does well, wages go up. There's no discussion about how wages go up, but wages go up. When wages go up, people have more money to spend. People spend more money. People having more money to spend and spending that money drives prices up, which causes inflation. That's supposed to be the mechanism, right? So then, in order to reduce inflation, you raise interest rates, which slows down the economy, which then reduces people's propensity to spend because they then are unemployed. You slow down the economy, people lose their jobs. And that way, inflation goes down because the demand for the goods goes down. And that is a mechanistic view of economic growth. It is the view that economic growth is driven by interest rates and really nothing else. So what drives economic growth is low interest rates. And when you have low interest rates, the economy grows dramatically. It's partially why Europe has had negative interest rates, because the idea is that negative interest rates do what? Well, if low interest rates drive the economy higher dramatically, then negative interest rates should drive the economy dramatically higher. So they're trying to get economic growth. by having low interest rates, negative interest rates. It's not succeeding. Japan, by the way, has tried that since the early 1990s. Low interest rates. Try to get economic growth. The economy doesn't grow. So we've had stagflation. We had high inflation, low economic growth, high unemployment. Now we've had low interest rates, low economic growth, low unemployment. So we have had, over the last 50 years, massive amounts of empirical evidence that disprove the Phillips curve. The Phillips curve is wrong. Why is it wrong? Because it doesn't understand economic growth. And this is stunning to me. It's truly stunning. That economists, mainstream economists, have no conception of where economic growth comes from. They have no conception of what drives an economy. Because what really drives an economy, you cannot model mathematically. And I think, by the way, this is true of even some free market economists who think that everything's kind of mechanistic because everything is driven by levers and pulls and levers. So if you follow this number, then that number has an impact on this number. You can understand everything just by doing that. But the economy is not mechanistic. What actually drives the economy, and I'll get to Jerome Powell's quotes in a minute. What actually drives an economy is entrepreneurship and innovation. Entrepreneurship and, call it, ingenuity. Entrepreneurship and ideas. Entrepreneurship is, as I would define it, the application of that ingenuity, those ideas, to the problem of production. Nicholas Navarro says that what drives an economy is human action. No, and I think this is where praxeology gets it all wrong. I don't think it's human action in the sense of praxeology, or in the sense of without explaining. It's not, because consumption is also human action, and consumption does not drive the economy. It contributes, but what really drives economic growth is a particular activity, a particular form of human action. And that particular form of human action is entrepreneurial, Israel Kurtzner calls it entrepreneurial discovery. I would call it entrepreneurial ingenuity, entrepreneurial innovation. Creating, making, figuring out, discovering new, better ways to do things, to make things, to advance things. It's not just about interest rates. That's a mechanistic view where you lower interest rate, capital becomes more available, we deploy more capital to a particular problem, that increases production. No, it doesn't increase production if there are no ideas, if there are no entrepreneurs, if there's no creation, if there's no ingenuity, if there's nothing new being made, if there's no thinking. What drives production is thinking, but a particular kind of thinking. A thinking as applied to production that expands the boundaries of human knowledge, that expands what is possible for us, expands what we can do. And it's individuals doing that thinking. This is why I think libertarian economists miss it. Even the Austrians don't quite get the entrepreneur. I mean, Mises is the one who comes closest. Israel Kurtzner comes close, but they all miss it because they don't recognize the value, at the end of the day, of innovation and of the innovator. Even Matt Ridley, who comes really, really close because he recognized the importance of innovation, because that's really what drives economic growth, doesn't recognize fully the individual, the importance of individual in that equation. Individual thinker. So what drives an economy is not any particular thing that government does. The only thing that government can do to drive an economy is get out of the way. That is, allow people the freedom of thought and the freedom of action to have the ideas and to test them in reality. That's it. It's not about interest rates. I mean, it is indirectly because interest rates distort and pervert the pricing mechanism, which is an important signal in the economy. But that's not the essential. It's not about taxes, although again, has a huge impact. It's primarily, more than anything else, about control, about regulations, about controlling business and entrepreneurs. If you want to get the economy going, you got to take the shackles off. The shackles off. Now, some of the shackles are taxes and interest rates, but the primary shackles are controls and regulations at all levels of government, and it's everywhere, and it's insidious. And that's why the industries that have the most shackles grow the least. The industries that have the least shackles grow the most. You can tax the industries that have the least shackles more, and they'll still grow the most because the shackles are what are really important. It's not even the incentives. And you can see this in places like Scandinavia. People say, how does Scandinavia do so well in spite of the fact that they have very high taxes? They do so well because they're less regulated. They're less controlled. They're taxed heavily. But the taxation is not what drives economic growth, the lower taxation. What drives, and this is what Republicans will never understand, what drives it is the freedom of the mind to think new thoughts, to innovate, and to apply those in action. And that you need, and you saw that in the late 19th century, early 20th century, when government was the least regulatory that it's ever been. You saw the biggest innovations, the fastest progress, the fastest economic growth in all of human history. Because the human mind was free to build, to create, to make. But what is truly astounding is that economists, now, this idea of innovation, this idea that innovation is important to progress, this idea that that there is a factor there that needs to be considered, has only been introduced into the profession of economics 20, 30 years ago by a guy named Romer, an economist by the name of Romer, who won a Nobel Prize for this. He introduced into the production function innovation of the economy, because it's all mathematics, right? But you can't model it mathematically. And the fact is, it's still not truly in the models. Not at the Fed. I've not heard, maybe a little bit on the Greenspan, but certainly not from Powell, any discussion of technology, innovation, as responsible for growth. All you hear about is money. It's all they can understand, is the flows of money. It's all they care about. It's all they can model. It's all they can project. So they think that by pulling this lever, by pulling that lever, by using interest rates this way, moving interest rates that way, they get economic growth. And they don't understand why it doesn't happen. So, for example, one of the things he doesn't understand is they had low interest rates since the financial crisis. And yet, inflation was low, and unemployment was low, and economic growth was low. And again, that's something that can't happen in their model. If unemployment is low, it must mean the economy is doing well. If the economy is doing well, there must be inflation, because everything is driven by money. So here's the quote. And he's complaining about they don't understand why unemployment is so low. Unemployment can be even lower than we thought, because we used to think unemployment couldn't go below 5%. Than we thought, and not result in troubling levels of inflation, because they viewed the relationship between unemployment and inflation as crucial. They didn't understand why did unemployment under Obama and then under Trump go way down, all the way down to under 3.5%, and there was no inflation. How can that be? Why didn't employees demand an increase in wages and then use that increase in wages to go buy stuff which would drive prices up? He says we had 3.5% unemployment, which was sort of the lowest period of sustained unemployment in 50 years. And we didn't see inflation. If you go back 50 years, inflation would have reacted very strongly to low levels of unemployment. No, it's not how it works. It never has been how it works. What has happened? Oh, wow. I can't pronounce your name. Thank you for that contribution, because it's all in Greek letters. But the question is relevant, so I'll use it here. It's a $100 question, so definitely. Would it be safe to say that comprehensive deregulation of the economy would cause deflation, which would be counterproductive to the Fed's mandate? Yes, and I'm getting to that, right? And not only that, but I would argue that we have seen massive deflation, good deflation in the sense of prices going down. We've seen that over the last 30 years, partially as a result of deregulation under Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. I like to give Jimmy Carter credit for a lot of deregulation because he did do a lot of deregulation, and nobody else other than myself gives him credit for that. Friend of Aristotle, I like that name, friend of Aristotle. Thank you for the contribution and thank you for the question. So the reason we have seen low unemployment, in other words, people employed across the board, is because actually the economy of the United States since the 1980s has done well. I know that's incredibly counter to everything that everybody says, because if you look at the wage numbers and you look at everything else, it doesn't look like we've done well, but we have done well. I'd say the last 10 years have been weaker under Obama and Trump, but even then, the economy, standard of living, quality of life actually grew faster than the numbers suggest. And again, the way economists measure everything in economics is flawed dramatically. And the reason we have done well is because of this effect that friend of Aristotle mentions. Deregulation in the 70s and 80s brought about dramatic increases in efficiency, in productivity, and dramatic decline in prices. Just think about air travel. Now, this is hard to comprehend, that air travel today, certainly in inflation-adjusted dollars, but even in just dollars, is dramatically, not a little bit, dramatically cheaper than it was in the 1960s and 70s. The availability of air travel, and now I'm not talking about COVID, let's talk about pre-COVID. The availability of travel, your ability to go anywhere in the world at unbelievably low prices, with unbelievably few constraints other than TSA, was a massive increase to the quality of life of Americans that is not measured by any economic statistic. And the decline in prices of airlines because of improved technology, but primarily because of the deregulation of the airlines that had happened under Jimmy Carter. The improvement and the cost reductions massively increased quality of life, standard of living, and reduced inflation as measured by, like the Federal Reserve. Prices went down. And even over the last 30 years. And it's not just, let me just say this, it's not just the price. It used to be that there were only certain airports you could go to. But now there are thousands of airports you can go to. And there are dozens of airlines you can use. So the availability of getting to particular places has increased dramatically. To go to certain places, there might have been once upon a time one flight a week. Now there's a flight every day, maybe 3 flights every day. How do you measure that availability from an economics perspective? How do you measure the availability of hourly flights to the place you want to go? The convenience of that. How do you measure that as an economist? Well, there is no number that you can use to measure it. There is no number you can use to measure it. So, deregulation and innovation, the hub and spoke method, I mean, not just innovation in technologies, but innovation in management, in processes, in distribution. I mean, think about what Walmart did. So one is deregulation, but the second is lower trade barriers. The fact that tariffs since World War II, and certainly since the 1980s, have been in decline dramatically across the board, across the world, including in China. Tariffs has gone down dramatically until Trump, right? That created an entire industry. First, there was the innovation of shipping, the container, which is a massive innovation. They reduced the cost of shipping dramatically. The ability of ship things in containers is so cheaper than shipping things in crates and in the other way. So that, and then you build container ships just built for containers. And these ships, you can build them standardized. And all the containers are standardized. And all the cranes are standardized. And everything is standardized. That reduced the cost of shipping dramatically. Just at the same time as tariffs were coming down. Just at the same time as production in China, in Thailand, in Taiwan, in South Korea, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in Singapore was ramping up. We call that globalization, by the way. Was a massive impact on quality of life and standard of living. A massive impact on cost reductions. We can focus on computers. And computers are essential even for that. The logistics, the networks. You need computers to manage all that. But even more impactful is the invention of the container, which had profound, dramatic impacts on the world. And then the deregulation of trade, which allowed us to import cheap products from China, had a profound impact on the standard of living of Americans, a profound impact on inflation being lower. Trucking deregulation within the United States and the ability to ship stuff from Mexico because of NAFTA, again, lowered the cost of goods. Trucking deregulation, again, happened under Jimmy Carter. So you get lower and lower and lower costs because of innovation, because of deregulation. And that's not captured in wages, because the wages can actually buy more. The wages can actually buy more. Even when it comes to food. We went from a period in which I grew up in the 60s and 70s, where we were assured we were heading towards famine, and where every few years there was famine somewhere around the world, to an era relatively quickly where the problem is obesity, where the problem is abundance, where the problem is too much food. Again, what does that mean? Technology, innovation, in this case what's called the Green Revolution, made food abundant all over the world. And that has to do with corporate farming, the fact that the family farm died is a good thing, because you brought in the ability to grow food on scale, which was done. So the value of deregulation, of innovation, of ingenuity, of increased productivity, of entrepreneurship, that is what resulted in an economy that grew actually faster than the numbers would suggest. That is the reason we had record unemployment, record low unemployment. It's not because of interest rates. Interest rates are a factor that influence, but mainly what the Fed does can cause damage. They're not what drives the economy. They're not what drives production. They're not what drives success, economic success. But all the Fed can think about is interest rates. All the Fed can think about is this relationship between inflation and unemployment, which doesn't exist. Sometimes it does, but not because there's a relationship there, causal relationship, because other factors are playing into it. So, thank you, Noel. The invention of a container is massive. You You can read about it. Just look it up online. It is one of the great contributors to human prosperity in the late 20th and the 21st centuries. But the Fed and economists generally cannot comprehend this. They cannot, they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know what to do with it. They can't model it mathematically. They can't put it into a formula. It doesn't fit the mechanistic view of economics. So, in my view, we have had improvement in standard of living for the last 50 years for many in the population. Not everybody, and it's uneven. The way this happens, it's very uneven. It creates all kinds of distortions because the Fed is still manipulating interest rates. The federal government is still taxing in bizarre kind of ways. The federal government is still regulating and regulating heavily some industries and less heavily other industries and so on. So it's uneven in terms of how it happens, but it has happened. And even though wages have been stagnant for some people, this standard of living, quality of life has actually gone up, even if they won't admit it. And the fact that unemployment has been so low is partially a feature of globalization. Americans didn't lose jobs because of China. America gained jobs because of China. There are many, many more jobs in America because of trade with China. There are many, many more jobs because of trade with Mexico, because of NAFTA, because of trade with Canada, because of trade with everybody. Thank you, yes, sir. Trade is a job multiplier, not a job destroyer. So, economists don't get this stuff. Now, I only have about 10 minutes to go because I really have to have a hard stop at 11:30. So we'll have to continue. We'll have to continue this discussion of Powell, the Fed, inflation, economy tomorrow. But and I'll probably do your super chat questions tomorrow because I do have a hard stop. Yeah. So, if you don't understand how an economy works, and yet you're running the institution that has profound impact on that economy, because look, I dismissed interest rates, but interest rates have profound impact because they have an impact on the allocation of capital. And the allocation of capital is crucially important to which and who gets capital in order to deploy for the sake of improving our economy and raising our standard of living and increasing and applying ingenuity and applying everything that I've talked about. So I'm not dismissing interest rates. It is the most important price in the economy. But it is not a mechanistic lever that causes economic activity. What causes economic progress and activity is innovation. It's entrepreneurship. It's people willing to take these ideas and run with them. And for that, they need the freedom to do that. The freedom to do it. It's almost the only thing they need. And for that, just look at China. All they did was give a little bit of freedom to their people in the 1990s. And wow, the economic growth that they got. Not because of any government policy, not because of interest rates, not because of inflation targeting, just because of more freedom to think, to innovate, to discover new ways of doing business, to discover old ways of doing business, but just do them, to take risk. As soon as you unleash the entrepreneurial spirits, production and ultimately wealth grows. So Powell goes on to say, we all know that high inflation can be a problem. But persistently low inflation can be a problem too. Why? Isn't the goal persistently low inflation so that I don't have to worry about my money being worth less and less and less every year isn't like your utopian goal if you're a central planner and you cared about the economy and you cared about the American people and you could do it. Wouldn't your utopian goal be zero inflation? That was predictable prices, predictable value, purchasing power of the dollar. Now, in my world, the ideal is declining prices. But declining prices moderately, nothing too dramatic, so that you can plan, you can predict. But no, he says persistently low inflation can be a problem. Why? And this is his reason. And this is mind-boggling in my view. When inflation is very, very low, it means lower interest rates. That's true, because interest rates have a factor of what I really require in order to lend you the money in terms of the fact that I can't use it now. It's a compensation for the fact that I can't use it now. And that takes into account what my alternatives are in terms of use. We'll call that the real rate of return. And then a piece of the risk that you might not pay back, that's the risk premium. And then the third part of an interest rate is inflation. You know, the possibility my dollar will be worth less in a year than it is now, so I need you to compensate me for that. So that's what goes into an interest. Real rate, just the time value, the fact that I'm giving the money up over a year and I could use it now. I want to be compensated for that. Second, risk. Third, inflation. If inflation is low, interest rates are low. Why is that a problem? That should be a desirable state. He says, in every interest rate is built in, whether we know it or not, an expectation of what inflation will be. Absolutely true. Right? And if people expect inflation to be very low, then interest rates will keep going down. Well, they won't keep going down. At some point, they'll stop. They'll go down up to a point. The only reason we have negative inflation rates is because central banks force negative inflation rates. The market would never do that. So they go down and they have an equilibrium at some point. Or they fluctuate around some low rate, but they never go negative and they never go to zero because there's always that time preference and that risk that always keep interest rates positive. He says, we've seen this around the world, lower and lower interest rates, lower and lower inflation. When interest rates get very low, listen to this, the Fed will have less room to cut interest rates in support of the economy. Now that is insane. Here's the logic. The logic is we have recessions. There's a business cycle. Even in a free market, you might have a recession once in a while. Because the economy is mechanistic, because the economy responds to interest rates directly, when a recession happens, we have to have the ability to cut interest rates, which then causes the economy to go up. This is the mechanistic view, right? So in order for the Fed to be able to cut interest rates must be high, or must be higher than, otherwise there's no room to cut. If interest rates are naturally low and there's a recession, what are we going to do? Oh my God, it's the end of the world. The Fed can't help us. Now, luckily for us, the Fed has found new ways to help us, which is print money without lowering interest rates, which is what they did during this financial crisis. They just print money and they start buying assets, which is unbelievably destructive, which we can talk about next time. So the reason to have inflation is so that interest rates are high, so that when we enter a recession, the Fed can lower them. Now, if that is not voodoo, nutty, crazy, amateur, unintelligible, central planning gobbledygook, I don't know what is. It is insane. It is nutty. It is crazy. It is stupid. And it just shows you how important they think they are. The only thing that matters, we have to structure the economy so that the Fed has the ability to lower interest rates in a recession, because that's what makes it, what allows us to recover, which is complete crap. And the recovery that happens when you lower interest rates artificially like that is a fake recovery. It causes capital to then be deployed to things that shouldn't be deployed. Recessions should just be tolerated. And if they are, markets are quickly self-correcting. What happens in a recession is the unproductive stuff gets liquidated. And that liquidation allows that unproductive capital to be deployed towards productive ends. And those productive ends are what ultimately lead to an increase in economic activity, which leads to exiting the recession. That's all that has to happen. The market itself allocates capital. But what happens when the Fed artificially lowers interest rates is the unproductive assets never get liquidated. In a country, some of that money goes into those unproductive assets. They stay around. They stick around. We come out of the recession, but we come out of the recession with unproductive assets still functioning, still being deployed, which lowers potential economic growth in the future. And ultimately, those unproductive assets will lead to another recession. And the capital that should have gone to new innovation, that should have gone to new people innovating, creating new stuff, building new stuff, the ingenuity of those people, that should have gone to the thinkers, the doers, the entrepreneurs, doesn't go to them. So you get lower economic growth, but you exit the recession because the Fed lowered interest rates. Yeah, I'm not even talking about the debts and all of that. I'm just giving you, connecting production, economic growth in a sense, to these other mechanisms. So I'll end with this, and then we'll pick this up tomorrow. We'll talk about this tomorrow. If you have any questions about the Fed, about the economy, about money, about inflation, about entrepreneurship, about all of this stuff, send them in today or early tomorrow. So tomorrow will be at 1 p.m. Pacific time. We'll be talking about this stuff. We'll be talking more about this. I'll recap what I talked about today, and then we'll take it from there. I've still got, we'll talk more about what Yaron Powell said. Hopefully you get a flavor for this. Low, and we'll talk about how interest rates move, how low interest rates ultimately drive interest rates up. Maybe, it depends on the supply and demand, depends on why they're low. So we'll talk about all that, supply and demand, and we'll try to cover all that tomorrow. But the key here is to understand, what I really want you to understand is that Jerome Powell represents a central planning mechanistic view of the economy that is divorced from reality and divorced from the true drivers of economic growth, which are entrepreneurship, ingenuity, innovation. And that this mechanistic approach can only cause damage, can only destroy, can only make things worse, short-term or long-term. All right. The show tomorrow is at 1 p.m. Pacific time. It'll be all devoted to this topic because I see I've got a lot to say about it. I encourage you guys to submit questions. I've got the Super Chat questions that you submitted today. We'll cover those tomorrow. I'll start with the economic ones, and then we'll go to the other ones. But if you've got other questions related to economics, questions related to the Fed, send them in. Yaron at yaronbrookshow.com. Yaron at yaronbrookshow.com. That's true of you listening live. It's true of you listening after the fact. Just send in questions, and I'll try to cover and just do a whole show tomorrow on what really drives the economy and how the economy works, at least to some extent. It's not going to be fully comprehensive, but it'll be, I think, interesting. And there's still a lot to talk about what Powell actually said. So remember, the reason we're doing well over the last few decades has nothing to do with Republican tax cuts. Republican tax cuts are meaningless given Republican spending. The reason we have done well over the last 40 years is because of deregulation and because of globalization. The two things that have made this economy go from a macro perspective, from a policy perspective, deregulation and globalization, and then the rest was done by the entrepreneurs. Thanks, everybody. I will see you tomorrow. Don't forget to like the show before you leave. Please like it. We should get up to 200 likes over there. If you liked this, you can share it. I'm sure the Christian will turn the economics section that we just did into a separate video. If you just want to share that one, that's fine. Share. Get my videos out there. Get people to engage. Get people to discover. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the show and to click on the bell so you get an announcement when I go live. And finally, thank you for everybody who supports the show. Thank you for those of you who value for value, get value out of the show and express it by providing value to me monetarily. I'd appreciate if you continue doing that. I'd appreciate if some of you increased it. That shows me that my show is being valued more over time. So thanks, everybody. I will see you all tomorrow, 1 p.m. Pacific time.